Hello, good morning. Welcome back to my channel, Hocantalk. Now, today this video, I'm going to talk to you about a country. It's a very secretive country, a country whereby not easy to get all their economic data and all this, but I'll do my best because this country has been mentioned quite often recently by Donald Trump, by a lot of newspaper. So I think it's worth giving this country certain weightage to mention about this country from very much the economic background point of view. But of course, I also wanted to make my video more interesting because I realized that a lot of viewers might want to listen to some side story about the country and all these things. So I will do my best to mention all the juicy story about this the country, Cuba. This is the topic today. But at the same time, my focus will be very much on the business and economic performance of this country, more towards the finance and business side, but a little bit on the background and the historical development. Again, my video will be presented in both languages, Chinese and English. And kindly subscribe to my video and circulate my video to all your friends so that they can also enjoy my video and learn from my video and also subscribe to my video. Okay, now without further delay, let's go through the thing. Again, it will be marker and paper format so that I can concentrate on giving you the best instead of spending time on the formality or formatting of the video. So let's zoom in on the first slide. Now, today's topic is a very difficult topic to talk about because information regarding this country is very difficult to come by. The country is called Cuba. Cuba is a wonderful country. It's a beautiful country. A lot of beautiful actresses actually come from Cuba. They are very active in USA, but again, this is not the topic today. The topic today, we are trying to dive deeper into Cuba economic structure, political structure, and so that to give my viewer an overall understanding of this wonderful country. Now, let's look at the second slide. Now, Cuba is a country that has, like many small country or Southeast Asia country, has gone through a long colonial period. So because they are small, they are less developed at that time. You know, the great empire Spain colonized this country in between 1492 to 1898. That's a long period of time, a few hundred years. So Cuba was under the control and management of Spain. But later on, as you know, Spain become weaker, and then the emerging of the USA. So they fought in a war, and during that war, Spain of course lost the war. So Cuba is being ceded to USA, meaning USA take over Cuba for a couple of years. And in the year 1902, Cuba achieved independent. But at that time, despite the fact that Cuba is achieved independent, Cuba is still under heavy influences by the USA. A lot of things, including the country leader, is also being at that time perceived to be under the instruction of the USA, under control by the USA. But again, I think the correct word is under a lot of strong influence and management by the USA. So that period of time lasted for almost 50 years. Okay, now everybody know that after 50 years, now if you look at history, a lot of similarity. Local people always come out to fight against the country who colonized them. That's number one. Local people always come out to fight a system when the system is not fair, when the system is biased. Why the system end up in unfairness or bias against a minority or bias against the local? It's a long history, but of course, there are some publications say that this is intentional kind of division of interest, so that easy for them to divide and conquer. So we can see similar example in Middle East. We can see similar example in Africa and similar example in India, Bangladesh, and all these developing country in the past. Meaning that you actually divide the local people into different groups, and then you give the minority a lot of power, you give the elite a lot of power, and then that led to division, conflict, which make foreign power easy to intervene and manage. So basically the same for Cuba. So it resulted in the Cuban revolution in 1959. So the previous leader, Fulgencio Batista, he was created according to all the report by USA, under USA power and influence. So he actually managed Cuba for a period of time, but a lot of people think that he's not fair, the system is not fair, only take care of the elites and all this. So because of that, a young lawyer by the name of Fidel Castro actually wanted to overthrow the management and hope that to bring Cuba back into a more a fairer system, to be fair to the local people and to everyone alike. So there was a Cuban revolution in the year 1959. So Fidel Castro is a young lawyer. He actually started attack of one of the barracks in Cuba, but failed. This is called the famous Moncada barrack attack. 100 over soldiers led by Fidel Castro. A lot of them were killed, and Fidel Castro and his brother was put into prison for 15 years. But luckily, in the year 1955, he was being released, and he went to Mexico. And 1 year later, in 1956, he actually come back to Cuba, and then he gathered more people, and this time he go into a guerrilla war with the government, and finally in the year 1959 he managed to overthrow the government led by Fulgencio Batista. Now what happened to Batista? He didn't die during the revolution. He managed to escape to another country in the Caribbean, and then later on he moved on to Spain. And he lived in Spain quietly, and he died in the years 1973 from a heart attack. So this is a brief history about Cuba revolutionary period. Again, you can read more about this, because if I cover too many of these aspects, then it becomes like a historical video rather than a business and finance video. But again, all these are very interesting. You can go and read a lot about that. And also in the early 60s, Cuba was also under the confrontation between the USA and Russia in a Cold War standoff. So after Castro took over, Cuba became close to Soviet Union and become a communist and planned economy. So now let's take a look at overview of Cuba. Cuba is a communist state, it's a planned economy, just like Russia, just like China in the past. Why I say China in the past? Because China now run on a hybrid system, not so much on a communist or socialism system anymore. Now, a very interesting fact is Cuba is the nearest communist state to USA. It's very, very near. It's only 90 miles away from Florida, one of the state of USA. So it's very near. So maybe that's the reason why Donald Trump has been mentioning about Cuba, because of the proximity to USA, and also it was involved in the confrontation as a conduit for Soviet Russia to put missile on in Cuba, aiming at USA. So at that time, it does cause a huge issue. The world was at the verge of having another world war, but luckily it was called off. So again, Cuba has always been in a difficult geographical position to USA. Now, let's look at Cuba political structure. Now, Cuba political structure is something like Iran and all these things, but again, they are not religious driven. They are more or less driven by ideology, meaning that they wanted everybody to be treated fairly. So if we look at the political structure, after the revolution was successful, all the different group of soldiers led by Castro, there are actually three groups of them, they form a party called the Communist Party of Cuba. After that, they set up something called the National Assembly of People Power, which is something like parliament, and all the members there are elected on a 5-year basis. And the candidate for that assembly are nominated by the Communist Party of Cuba, which they call PCC. Now, under the National Assembly of People Power, then they will select all the parties under Council of Ministry, which handle all the ministerial duties of the country, such as in economy, defense, and all this. They show of the Council of State, like something like a Congress or anything. Again, I won't go deeper into this. And the Council of Ministry and Council of State are governed by the President. And again, the President is elected by the National Assembly, which also report to Communist Party of Cuba. Now, there is no election in Cuba, actually. So Cuba, all the government in power are all elected based on this sort of structure. Now, let's look at the next slide, which actually affect Cuba from a financial and business point of view. Now, everybody should know that there's a USA embargo on Cuba. Why? Because after Castro took over, he actually nationalized a lot of business asset owned by USA because he thinks it's not fair. Actually, this thing happened many times all over the world history. You look at the same thing happen in India, happened in Middle East, happened in elsewhere. So this is nothing new. So in the 1960s, USA think that they are very unhappy about the nationalization. So in 1960, they actually slapped an embargo on Cuba. And in 1962, the full embargo is in place so that there's not allowed to invest anything in Cuba, no trade with Cuba, and also no access to USA market at all. So the USA market is totally cut off from Cuba, which resulted in higher cost of living in Cuba, a lot of imported inflation because Cuba got to import all the necessary goods from further away market rather than from USA, because USA is very near to Cuba. So they have to import things from further away, and also because of the sanction, they cannot do settlement through US bank and all these things. So a lot of the payment and all this got to incur more costs to do other settlement. Now, let's look at the Cuba monetary system because this is important. Now, the monetary system is divided into two phases, the before 2021 and after 2021. Before 2021, Cuba actually run dual currency. Something like China, CNH is for outside of people to use, CNY is for China domestic usage. If anyone want to interest to know what is the difference between CNH and CNY, you can refer to my video which I've done earlier. It's very interesting. It's also very informative. Now, Cuba also run dual currency system prior to 2021. So they have something called the Cuban peso. Cuban peso is only for local people, and they also have Cuban convertible peso. That's for foreigners. So if you go there for tour or anything, you instead of change your currency into Cuban peso, you have to change it to Cuban convertible peso. But what happened then in January 2021, the government of Cuba think that it's too complicated. And you also create arbitraging and differences and all this. So they actually cancel the Cuban convertible peso and only stick to Cuban peso. But because of that, there's a lot of uncertainty, volatility, because once you merge two different currencies, so there's a lot of arbitraging, there's a lot of black market and all this. So, but the government, in order to stabilize all these things, they actually do a peg of Cuba peso or Cuban peso to US dollar. So for every 24 Cuban peso is equal to $1 US. And this exchange rate has more or less been stable for the last few years. So you don't really see a lot of volatility in the FX rate of Cuban peso. It's being pegged to US dollar. Now, how about the Cuba financial market? So I roughly go through something. This country has no stock exchange, so there's nothing about listing, IPO, capital market, nothing. And this country also never issue any bond, any foreign debt, nothing. But the country also does have some foreign debt with countries like China, Venezuela, because these are the trading partners. So especially China. So they do have some foreign debt with Russia as well. So Cuba is a country with very limited, almost zero financial market. There's no stock market. There's no bond market also. How about the tax system in Cuba? How about the tax system? Now, because Cuba is a communist state, everything is free. education is free. A lot of things is all free, provided by the government. So the corporate tax rate in Cuba is relatively high at 35% for all the corporates. But for those corporate who actually operate in the resource industry, like the mining industry, they have to pay a higher interest rate, tax rate, which is at 50%. But they also encourage joint venture with local company and foreign companies. So for this joint venture, they do give tax incentives. Sometimes they waive the tax so that to promote all this industry. Now about personal tax. Personal tax is up to 50% on a progressive basis. Progressive. And how about non-resident? For example, if I go to Cuba and then teach Chinese or teach finance, the salary that I receive, I need to pay a flat 15% rate to Cuba government because I am not considered a local resident. How about Cuba foreign relationship with other country? On a global basis, what is the standing of Cuba? Now, Cuba has been a member of United Nations since 1945. So since very early, they become a members of United Nations. And the foreign relationship with China started from 1960. How about Singapore? Singapore actually has a diplomatic ties with Cuba from the year 1997. So we do have a linkage to Cuba. And surprisingly, Cuba allowed Chinese citizens to visit Cuba 30 days without a visa. And Singapore also, if for Singaporeans who want to travel to Cuba for tour, for whatsoever, is also visa free for 30 days. And on the other hand, Cuban citizen, when they come to Singapore, they also enjoy a 30 days free visa stay in Singapore. So these are some of the snapshot of our Cuba foreign relation. Now, let's take a look at the overview of Cuba. So maybe people don't even know how big they are and what's the relevance, size and population. Now, Cuba is about 100 over 1,000 square kilometers. So in comparison, I'll link some country to that. One Cuba is equal to 148 Singapore, or 98 Hong Kong, or 5 Israel. Why Israel? Because Israel has been in the limelight recently. So I use Israel so that people can know. And it's about one Cuba is about 3.3 Hainan Island. Why Hainan Island? Because I do some video on Hainan Island. So I actually use Hainan Island to give you a comparison for people who are keen to know about Hainan Free Trade Port. Can also refer to my previous video on Hainan. How about population of Cuba? Population of Cuba is almost half of Malaysia. Malaysia have about 22 million. Cuba has about 10.9 million in the year 2026. Now the next slide will be more interesting to give you a breakdown of the population. In my own opinion, Cuba does have some aging population issue. And also just take a look at the breakdown, okay? Now Cuba population total is 10.9 million for the year 2026. And those aged between 14 years and below make up about 16.3% of the total population in Cuba. From 15 years old to 64 years old is about 67%, and 65 years old and above. So you see, I am 60 years old. I'm under this. I'm between the 15 to 64. So the balance will make up the 65 and above. How about the medium age? The medium average 42 years old. So it's not really a very young country. It's not a very young country. And like I mentioned, the economic numbers of Cuba is not easy to obtain. So I try my very best. Now I give you some indicator based on 2025 numbers. So the GDP is about 110 billion US dollar, 110. Singapore is about 500 plus, likewise for Malaysia. So Cuba is about maybe 20% of Singapore, 20% of Singapore GDP. On a per capita, it's about 9,000 US dollar, 9,000. And unemployment is 3%. Now, Cuba, because they have free education, the literacy rate in Cuba is 100%. Everybody is well educated. So the unemployment rate is not high. It's at 3%. But it's due to two reasons. Number one, because the whole country is centrally run. It's a planned economy. It's a community. So they are given job in the state-owned enterprises. 80% of the population work for the government. So they are given jobs there. So that's the reason why the unemployment is not high. But underemployment, meaning that someone work in a position that is below his capability or his capacity, this is called underemployment. Underemployment is considered high. But again, this is not really fair because any country that has a huge state-owned economy, usually underemployment is always an issue. So if you don't look at elsewhere, you look. I'm quite sure in your heart, you know, you know what I mean. So it's a little bit politically sensitive, so I won't go into deeper. Now the export of Cuba. Now how does Cuba earn their living? Now Cuba is very strong in exporting nickels because after they nationalize all the mine and all this, so they actually take over the running of the nickel mining and they export the nickel mine, nickel ore. And also because all of them are very highly educated, there are 46 universities in Cuba. So all the education is free, so they produce a lot of high capable people, and especially in the field of doctor and medical. That's why Cuba has a lot of doctors who go overseas to Latin America, to Africa to provide medical services. So medical related product, because they also have R&D, they do vaccine and all this thing, is about 15% of their total export. And tobacco, we all know that Cuba is very good in cigar because of certain plant in Cuba. So they are 5%, they are the best. They consider Cuba cigar is the best in the world. Now, there used to be also a big planter of sugar, but sugar plantation in relative to other industry now is dropping. So sugar export is about 3%. Let's look about some historical performance of Cuba GDP. The numbers is very not consistent, or not consistent because I can't get all the numbers. So I only plug in some of those years that I managed to get. So for the year 2020, the GDP is about 107 billion, and by the time 2023 is 140 billion. So in between there are some fluctuation, and you can see 2023 there's a sudden improvement because that's due to the recovery from the COVID-19, because Cuba is very strong in tourism, but the COVID-19 has bring the tourism to almost zero. And also there's some price adjustment and all these things. But in 2024 and 2025, the GDP dropped again to about 110. Now, again, likewise for the foreign reserve and the foreign direct investment, this M is a short form. Also, the numbers is not easy to get, but I actually put down here. So the foreign reserve for 2019 is about 11.5 billion. For the year 2021, it dropped to 9.1 billion. FDI, I can only find 2022 is a miserable 100 million. This is also because of the embargo of USA. So a lot of countries just do not want to invest in Cuba. So it resulted in very low foreign direct investment. Now, what are the main industry in Cuba? So people might ask. So like I mentioned, 80% of the workforce actually work for the government. So it's a communist country. It's a centrally planned economy. Now, the major industry is here. There are sugar industry, very big, but now it's reducing, becomes smaller. Nickel is a huge industry there, and also because of the EV, the battery, nickel has been a very sought after mineral, so nickel export is gaining momentum. Tobacco, they are good in cigar, and oil refinery and energy. They don't have a fossil fuel, they don't have oil reserve, but they actually import crude oil and then do refineries, just like Singapore. Because of the high education level, they have a lot of R&D, doctor, medical personnel. That's why they are strong in pharmaceutical kind of business setup and also biotechnology. They produce a lot of vaccines. So from there, we go further down. There's one very important industry that we cannot ignore if we mention about Cuba. One of the big foreign exchange earner or money earner for Cuba is the tourism industry, which is as big as the Nikkei industry. So in the service industry, Cuba is not strong in finance, but they are very strong in tourism. But again, a lot of the resort hotel are all owned by the government. There are some privately owned hotel, but smaller basis. Now the tourism basically focus on three areas. One will be the beach resort. They are very famous. It's very beautiful beaches. Also, people go there for culture. You can see a very unique culture in Cuba, and also people go there for medical treatment. So it's called medical tourism. Now, the contribution from tourism to Cuba economy, I managed to get 2019 figure, which is about 2.65 billion, 2020 about 1.15, and 2022 and 2023 is above 1 billion. So you can see that tourism has always been a significant contributor to Cuba economy, especially to help them to earn foreign currency. Now we are coming to the last slide, and the last slide I want to let you all know about the trading partners of Cuba. Again, the figures are not very easily gathered, so I meant instead of the numbers, I actually list down the main export market of Cuba and the main importer of Cuba. So the main exporter of Cuba is there are China, Spain. Of course, Spain used to be the previous master of Cuba. Canada, Netherlands, and Venezuela, which is very nearby. The importer, where do they import from? Again, it's China, Spain, EU, Canada, and Venezuela. Okay, so today we are coming to the end of the presentation, the video, and I hope all the slides above give you a very good understanding of this country whereby the economic figures are very difficult to obtain. That's the reason why I compensate by talking a little bit on the historical background, the political, to make this whole video interesting. So to conclude, now after the video, you know the historical development of Cuba, you know the political structure, you know what is Cuba revolution, you know what is USA embargo, and also you know the monetary system in Cuba. You also know the main contributor to Cuba economy and also their trading partners. So again, I hope you like my video. I keep my video in a very precise manner so that you benefit the most on knowledge side rather than visual impact. So I really hope you can subscribe to my video and circulate my video to all your friends so that they can also subscribe to my video after watching the video. Okay, thank you very much. I will continue to do wonderful video. Do support me, and I'll see you next video. Bye bye.